Dr. Karen Sullivan, board certified neuropsychologist. I am so pleased that so many of you decided to sign up for this 3-session course on science-based brain health. We had over 400 of you SoCal Gas wonderful people sign up for our first lecture. So we were just thrilled to be invited back to offer you this 3-course session. I want to start off by encouraging you to take this time that we have scheduled together as a way of providing yourself with some self-care. Also, a sincere thank you for providing such an important resource to our country. And the idea that you spend so much of your time in service to others, I'm sure you also do in your family and in your community. I want you to look at this special time that we have together for these next 3 sessions as your time. Okay, I know you've had a long week already, one more day to go, but I so appreciate your interest in this topic and promise to use your time wisely. So our topic tonight is how to minimize your risks for dementia throughout the lifespan. And the first thing we have to do, of course, is express our gratitude to the lovely lady who got us here in the first place, the recently retired Lourdes Gutierrez. She saw me give a talk in another with another company and thought this would be something that you folks at SoCal Gas would really appreciate. And I think she was right. And we also want to give a warm welcome to the woman who is taking over for Lourdes. Her name is Becky Allen, and I've met her briefly through email. Seems like a lovely person. And I am so appreciative that your company has such a clear commitment to wellness. And by incorporating brain health into the wellness conversation, I think that they are really serving you. I think that this conversation tonight will be enlightening, engaging, and very instructive, give you very specific take-home messages. So what we're going to do is have the first night of our lecture series. This is based on evidence-based information and recommendation. So this is not a corporation coming to you with a product placement. If you were here with me for my top 10 recommendations, you know that that's really the motivation for why I developed this program, is there's such a rich information at the level of the brain in scientific circles, but that information doesn't trickle down to the everyday person as much as it should. So for each lecture that we are going to do together, you should have received a workbook in the mail, 3 different workbooks. And the reason we have these accompanying the program is because as we're talking tonight, I don't want you to be divided in your attention, wondering if you should write something down. Well, that was really interesting. That was really helpful. So you have all of my slides in the workbook. We also then had an opportunity to provide you with more in-depth information. One of the things we're going to talk about tonight are the interactive worksheets that are a part of the workbook. And when we get there in the series, I'm going to explain that a little bit more. So if you were with me last time for the top 10 recommendations, this will be a refresher. And if you didn't happen to catch that, these are important concepts that you need to know in order to make the best use of the information we're going to share tonight. So the first thing we did when we first got to know each other, is about a month ago, I think, is we decided what the problem was. And in terms of brain health, the problem is what we call the brain fitness industry. And what those are the supplements, the brain games, the brain teasers that promise much more than they can actually provide. So these are the claims to reduce memory loss, to be able to prevent dementia, to be able to reverse dementia. None of those products have scientific merit. If they did, they would not be offered to you over the counter. A big time pharmaceutical company would have come along and gotten those. And what we worry about is not so much your wasting of money, but what really bothers me much more is the wasting of time and hope. A lot of people are spending time and putting their heart into these products when there is just no return on the investment. So what I'm offering you now is the complete opposite. Everything that we talk about in this series is science-based. When you hear a doctor say that this is an evidence-based recommendation, what they are telling you is that it has been vetted by a jury of peers in a very objective way, and that the recommendations are not based in someone trying to sell you a product. A lot of what these products use to make their sale is anxiety. We are very scared of losing our minds, of developing dementia. And so one of the things we had to do at the beginning of our conversation was to define what is normal brain aging. Okay, so just as the body changes over time, so does the brain. And what we talked about is that very mild changes that don't interfere with your ability to be independent, like reduced processing speed, a little bit more trouble coming up with the words you want to say, specifically for proper nouns, so other people's names. We also talked about the fact that our hearing and our vision goes down as we get older, and sometimes that can also interfere with our ability to make new memories. But when we are normally aging, we are independent in what we call the 3 instrumental activities of daily living, and those are driving, remembering to take our medications every day, and the most complex one is financial management. So if you are concerned, yourself, a loved one, a parent, I always say, look to the checkbook. If somebody can balance a checkbook, if they are managing multiple bills, or better yet, even investments, Excel spreadsheets, very, very, very likely that they are not in the category of dementia. So when we talk about dementia, it's very important that we are all on the same page. Dementia is not normal aging. It is not normal for someone to have severe memory loss as they get older. You've probably heard that term, old-timers disease, right? That's what we used to call Alzheimer's. And it kind of infers that if someone gets old enough that they are going to have a severely impaired memory, and that's not it at all. So I want you to think about dementia like a big old umbrella. It's a big concept, but underneath that umbrella, there are different diseases that cause the state of dementia. So Alzheimer's disease being one of the most common, vascular dementia after a stroke. Lewy body dementia is very common, not well known. Parkinson's disease dementia, there's probably about 125 different types of neurological conditions that cause the state of dementia. Okay, so why that's important is because we want folks to understand it's not normal, something abnormal is going on, and we want people to get better answers than just being told that they have dementia. But the great news is that we really do have the power to influence our brain health. And that's really why we're here today. And so remember before I was saying there's kind of these secret circles of brain scientists and brain doctors, and they know very well exactly what to do to keep the brain healthy. And I'm going to let you in on their little secret right now. And this is really at the heart of the I Care for the Brain program. So it's really as simple as this. There are a group of known risk factors that when these factors are poorly controlled, they significantly increase your risk of developing dementia. There's also something called cognitive reserve, and this is based on a scientific insight that came out about 15, 20 years ago, where folks were a part of a memory study. And when they passed away, they donated their brains to science. And what they found was on autopsy, 1 in 4, so 25% of these folks met the clinical criteria for Alzheimer's disease. They had the plaques and tangles in their brain. But when they look back on their testing in real life, their memory was completely normal. So it is possible to have a physiological issue at the level of the brain like Alzheimer's, but people don't necessarily express it in real life. And so the scientist, Dr. Stern, looked at the characteristics of that 1 in 4. He wanted to know, what did those 25% do different? And he came up with a group of behaviors that were kind of protective, that people could compensate both at the cellular level, but also with strategies and ways to work around the issues related to the dementia. So what we are doing together is something pretty special, really quite important, which is I'm going to teach you what these risk factors are and how to reduce them. I'm also going to teach you what are the proactive things that you can do. Think of it like making a deposit in your brain bank every day that will increase your cognitive reserve. Okay, so this is really what our conversations are going to focus on. The specific learning for today is we are going to talk about how our genes, our genetic material, and our environment, which means our lifestyle, the choices that we make every day, what we do with our health, what we don't do with our health, how do they interact to either increase or decrease our risk of dementia. We're going to go through the lifespan starting with childhood, moving up through young and middle adulthood, and ending up in older adulthood. If you're not sure where you land on that spectrum, the cutoff for older adulthood is 65 years old. So already, I hope that that's piquing your interest, because typically we think of dementia as something that only happens to older folks, something that only matters once you get into that older adulthood. And what I hope to convince you of tonight is that that is not true at all. We really need to take much more of a long view on these risk factors, even going back to in utero when mothers are carrying their babies. Pretty amazing. And not just thinking about the things not to do, I want to teach you the proactive things that you can do that science has taught us increase that cognitive reserve. What are those coins that you can put in your brain bank every single day to buffer the effects of dementia if it happens to you? So all of the lectures are very similar in terms of their format. We spend the first half talking about the education, understanding the material, understanding the consequences if we don't act. And then we transition into the second part of our lecture, which is the recommendations. And this is what I think is special about this program. We're not just giving you information. I'm going to give you very specific action steps that you can start to take today that will truly improve the health of your brain. So first, let's just talk about our genes. Many of you probably know this, but this is a good reminder. Genes are made from DNA and found within almost all of our cells. We have 30,000 genes total, 2 copies from each parent. And our genetic makeup is determined at the moment of conception. Think of having a die in each of your hand. And the moment you are conceived, those hands are shaken, those dice get thrown on the table, and whatever those genes are what you live with for the rest of your life. What these genes do is they provide instructions that we need, our biology needs, in order to build and maintain our bodies. So a lot of diseases, brain-related or not, come from an interaction between these hardwired genes that are what they are and what we do in everyday life. So I want to explain that a little bit more with this slide. So if you are someone like me who has a family history of dementia, and that loved one who started to have dementia had their symptoms begin after about the age of 70 or 80, you very likely have a genetic variant. Okay. If you are someone who has a family history that is quite strong for younger onset dementia, let's just say younger than the age of 60, unfortunately, these are the folks who have what we call genetic mutations. These are very rare, unfortunately, faulty genes. Their effects are typically happening earlier in life. That's a good rule of thumb when you're trying to consider your family history of dementia and how that might affect you. The rule of thumb is who was younger when they got their dementia, that is going to be more genetic. And so in a lot of these folks, these people will get that subtype of dementia no matter what they do. But I want to emphasize this is very, very rare. Okay. So I'm a practicing neuropsychologist who sees many patients every month and have been practicing on my own for about 10 years. And I would say in that 10 years, I have unfortunately diagnosed probably less than 10, this is out of thousands of patients, with early onset dementia, okay? The vast majority of folks are in the variants. And what you need to know about that is that genetic variants are kind of like a predisposition. So think of it kind of like a lock and key fit, right? So the genetic variant for that dementia is what it is, but it's not necessarily going to activate or turn on unless the key that happens in everyday life, these risk factors, gets into it and it's a perfect lock and key fit and turns on the gene. Okay, so let's get even more specific and think about how this relates to dementia. So genes play a role in almost all dementia. Again, but for most of us, it is something in life that happened that turned on that gene. And that's really the passion behind this project, is why aren't we talking more about what those things are, okay? As I said a moment ago, very few dementias are due to just mutations, okay? And I'm going to give you a great example with Alzheimer's disease. So you might not know this, but there are actually two types of Alzheimer's: early onset before the age of about 60 and late onset. So as I alluded to a minute ago, folks who have the genes for early onset could have been saints in their everyday life, running marathons, eating a vegan diet, meditating 10 hours a day. And unfortunately, they were going to get that Alzheimer's disease at the age of 45, no matter what they did, okay? The vast majority of folks over in that beginning and late 70s, early 80s, as I said before, that is more of a what happened during that person's lifetime that turned on that gene. And when I think back to my grandmother who had Alzheimer's disease, the things that I know were known risk factors for her were certainly her diet, drinking too much alcohol, smoking cigarettes. But back then in the 20s, 30s, 40s, they didn't talk about those things, not only as being negative, but science yet hadn't gotten to the point where we could link those up with Alzheimer's disease. So we are really in an amazing time in history where this information is available. My thought is we just have to make it more accessible to the public. So you might be puzzled, why are we looking at the lifespan? Again, isn't dementia something that just happens to older folks? Well, guess what? Almost all dementias are the result of a process, a disease process that has developed over several decades. So I really believe you will be shocked tonight when we go through some of these risk factors that we have been able to, with good scientific methods, tie them to folks in their older adulthood, in their 80s, when we are all, we're kind of struggling to not develop dementia. It's really pretty fascinating. So now we're going to take it all the way back. And this is really great if you have grandkids, if your children are younger. This is really important information to try to get out to the people that you love. So the first thing is, we're going to talk about what is happening in the mother's body. So the first one is maternal smoking. And the link there, the bridge, is that unfortunately, babies whose mothers smoked can have lifelong cardiovascular and metabolic issues, okay? So a lot of what happens in the brain as we get older, as you're going to learn, is related to blood flow. Very, very critical. Maybe the most important concept: circulation of blood in the brain, which brings oxygen and glucose. Those are the fuels that the brain needs in order to survive. Low birth weight, unfortunately, is another risk factor, and they have put forth 6.2 pounds. So they are more likely, if you track them in their 40s and 50s, and statistically speaking, if you were to test them against babies that were bigger, statistically speaking, those folks have more early onset cognitive decline, okay? Now, I know if any of you have a precious little baby that was very premature, that might be kind of scary. What I want you to know as we're talking about these risk factors is so many of them are cumulative. So one of these is not what we're talking about. What we're really looking for is a lifetime of risk factors that ultimately build up someone's key so strong into that genetic lock of that predisposition that it would open it up, okay? So low birth weight babies are at increased risk for many conditions that are risk factors for dementia. So a perfect example is lung development. Lungs are the very last thing to develop when we are in the womb, and babies who are born very small oftentimes have underdeveloped lungs, and that can be a lifelong issue. And when the pulmonary system, the respiratory system, is not working in an ideal way, we can get things like chronic pneumonia, we can get things like asthma. And again, those things in and of themselves aren't the problem. It's that if over someone's lifetime they have issues with getting enough optimal oxygen through their body and in their brain, it can be an issue. Now, this one we've kind of known intuitively for a long time, but what I like about the data that I've chosen to present to you is I like the specifics. We all know that not doing good in school is probably not good for a kid, right? But we want to understand that issue a little bit more. So this only started to be a focus of scientific inquiry in about 2015, when they just simply saw an association between kids who were about 9 and 10 not doing good in school and then being able to look at late life dementia. There was a way that they were able to statistically compare those things. And what they found, and this had been the result of studies, obviously, that had gone on for decades. So the data was just available in 2015. So the risk for dementia increased by 21% in people who were in the lowest tier of childhood school grades. And when they looked at them over the age of 75, that accounted for 50% more decline. And, that's pretty startling. So individuals who went on to go after middle school, so grades 9 through 12, had a 28% lower risk of dementia compared to people who only completed elementary education. And what I want to point out about this is that these are just correlation studies. And what that means is as education goes down, dementia goes up, right? But what we don't have is necessarily a direct line connecting the two. So you might infer from this information, well, are they talking about intelligence? Are they talking about, what they learned? But if you really think about it critically and you think about kids who don't have the chance to do well in school, it gets back to way bigger issues, things like nutrition, right? Things like resources, parent mental health, living in poverty, living in violence. So this is just a very broad risk factor. We probably could go in depth with it a lot more. There are some data to suggest that certain learning disabilities are associated with later life dementia. So specifically, dyslexia in early life is associated with a type of dementia called primary progressive aphasia, where instead of folks losing memory, they lose their ability to speak and to comprehend language. Now, again, remember, we are not here to promote anxiety. I think by knowing more, you actually reduce your anxiety, but it doesn't mean if you or your grandbaby has dyslexia that this is going to happen to them. It just means that statistically, we can tell that there is an increased risk. So again, this gets back to this intuitive knowing, but I like that we can put specifics to it. So what they looked at are kids who had low levels of physical activity and watched what they said is too much television. And they followed them as they grew older, and they were almost 2 times more likely to have poor cognitive function in their 50s. And what is powerful about this data is, again, statistically, they were able to take away the effects of education, smoking, alcohol, high blood pressure, high BMI, to have these 2 times more likely effects. So that means low physical activity and too much television in a childhood is more powerful than the effect of smoking and alcohol in our 50s. Holy smokes. So getting into those specifics, how they defined it, low physical activity, was if 3 times a week, that kid did not get physically active for more than 50 minutes, okay? High television viewing, they considered to be 4 hours a day. So again, this is gonna be a theme in our time together as we talk about these really kind of big, complex scientific concepts, but at the end of it, we're breaking it down into these super specific recommendations. So here you go. It looks like science is telling us any more than 4 hours a day for a kid to watch TV and to not be active any less than 3 times a week for 50 minutes. Now you have a cutoff. Now you have a suggestion that you can make to a loved one. Now we're going to move a little bit more into our 20s, 30s, and 40s. And guess what is the most influential factor on future brain health? It is the health of your heart. And I really believe if we talked about this more, we would have more motivated people out there trying to keep their cardiovascular health in tip-top shape. So it's really as simple as this: heart health equals brain health. Okay, and this is true throughout the lifespan, but it actually turns out it's more true in your 20s, 30s, 40s, even getting into your 50s, okay? And there's really 3 biggies that you need to know about that I want you to work hard to not have, or if you have them, to control them optimally, because these are the strongest risk factors. These are diabetes, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, also called hypertension, and high cholesterol. These are your strongest, most powerful risk factors for developing Alzheimer's or having a stroke that is so severe you develop vascular dementia. Now, many of you may have these diagnoses. And again, we are definitely not here to scare, but you have to optimally control these conditions so you reduce that risk factor. And all throughout our 3 sessions together, you're going to hear themes. We're going to get back into these topics. So if you're like, I'm dying to ask her a question about this, chances are it'll come back around. And at the end, we do a nice Q&A. You get a chance to ask me then. And here's why these are all problematic. It's because they affect the blood vessels in the exact same way. And that is by narrowing blood vessels and reducing blood flow to the brain. So we're just going to do a little science lesson here. If you can see in our model, you can see that there are red and blue kind of lines and stripes running throughout this human body. The red ones are our arteries. And if you think about the A that starts in the word arteries and think about away, that can be helpful. So your arteries are there to move blood away from your heart. The blue ones are vessels. Vessels are there to bring that blood back up into the heart. So it's really as simple as the heart pushing out all of this blood, and it goes throughout the body, provides all the nutrients and support that we need in all our different organs, and then goes all the way back into the heart and gets same cycle happens over and over again. The heart is so important to the brain because about 1/4 of all the blood that comes from every single heartbeat is meant for the brain. And I said it before, blood carries the 2 things that a brain cell needs to stay alive, and that is glucose and oxygen. The thing that is unfortunate but important to know about brain cells is that they cannot store their fuel. They can only store glucose and oxygen for about 7 minutes. Between 7 minutes and 9 minutes, you start to see brain cell death. After 9 minutes, it's certain you are going to lose brain cells. After about 9 to 11 minutes, now you're losing networks of brain cells. And this is where, after a stroke or after a heart attack, folks are left with very significant impairments. So this really reinforces that idea that time is brain. If you ever feel like you're having a stroke or a heart attack or see someone having some of those symptoms, it is critical that you get to medical attention immediately, because those brain cells have a limited lifetime of their fuel available to them. So this slide really speaks to the idea of the lifespan, about talking about these things as young as we can possibly be, because there is a buildup of these diseases over time. So I want you to look at, on the left-hand side of my screen is a series of 5 different blood vessels. And what I want you to notice is the one on top is normal. That is, when we are in our 20s, look how open and healthy that blood vessel is. When blood vessels are happy and healthy, they are flexible. They can easily expand and contract based on the needs for fuel of the body at that time, okay? They are wide open. They can bring in as much blood as they possibly can. There is nothing obstructing their flow. The first thing that typically happens in the human brain is that we start to get the deposits of cholesterol from our diet. Too much saturated fat is what really kicks off this process. And what you can see is that over time, by looking at those images as you go down, that little cholesterol is forming, and now we've got a plaque. Okay, the second to the bottom one there, you can see how much narrowing is happening in that blood vessel where just not enough blood is going to be able to go through. What I really want you to notice is on that bottom vessel, not only do we have that little grouping of the yellow dots representing the cholesterol particles, but do you see that little red circle that's going around it? That is a form of a blood clot. And that is our bodies being extremely smart, because what they want to do is to make that cholesterol packet go right up against the blood vessel wall. It doesn't want it floating around, because if it floats far enough downstream, it can clog a blood vessel, and that's how a stroke can happen. So what the body does is it actually builds a little bit of a wall around that cholesterol particle to secure it to the blood vessel so it won't float away downstream, okay? But because of that little clot, there is a price to pay, which is further narrowing, okay? So it would make sense that the smallest blood vessels in the whole body are going to be most affected by this, what we call vascular disease, right? Well, I wonder if you can think about where the smallest blood vessels are in the human body. They are in the feet, they are in the kidneys, the eyes, and in the brain. So if you think about what diabetes, when it's poorly controlled, does to someone, what does high blood pressure do when it's uncontrolled? What does high cholesterol do? You can kind of see how all of these things can run together. Physical inactivity is probably your second strongest risk factor when we are in the 20s, 30s, 40s age. Okay, so it kind of comes back to bite you in the butt as you get older. So the question in this research study was, how often do you participate in physical activity that lasts at least 20 to 30 minutes and causes breathlessness and sweating, okay? So people who did this at least twice a week were able to cut their risk of getting dementia by 50%. That is so powerful. And they compared it with folks who were sedentary who didn't do that. And it turns out this benefit, the power of exercise, was even stronger for people who had a family history of Alzheimer's. So those of us who have a genetic family history, it's because we carry something called an ApoE4 gene, okay? And there's about 4 different versions of it. And depending on how many of those genes you have, that's what's going to give you your genetic risk for Alzheimer's. So what we should take away from this is, if you have a family history, parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, cousin, this information needs to hit home with you even more than if you don't have a family history, okay? So remember before I said that saturated fat from our diet kind of kicks it off? Well, that's for sure. First thing that happens in the blood vessels in the brain that ultimately leads to dementia decades later: too much saturated fat, too much salt, and too much sugar. So basically the things that make things taste amazing. Okay. I'm sorry. You don't shoot the messenger. I'm just here because I care. Okay. All things in moderation. We are not extremists. We don't feel that you can never have these things. But if you knew when you were making those decisions that it wasn't just your waistline that was at stake, that it was the future of your brain health, I truly believe you might make a different decision. So high saturated fat intake increased the rate of decline in cognitive abilities with age. So what that means is, even if you don't wind up having a diagnosable case of dementia, you will have worse cognitive abilities as you get older if you take in too much saturated fat. Now, this is one of those areas where corporations tend to really put on a big show in terms of these supplements that, we don't believe in, because there's something that feels right. We need to eat healthy, right? And if I'm not eating healthy, well, maybe I can get it in a vitamin. Maybe I can get it in a supplement. And besides from supplementation, if you have an identified vitamin deficiency, like if the doc tells you, hey, you need to take vitamin B12, then by all means, take that supplement. If you are anemic, by all means, take anemia. If you have a low vitamin D deficiency, which so many of us do, take those pills. But I do not believe in additional supplements to support brain health by and large. There's a couple exceptions that we will talk about. Fish oil, high quality fish oil from small fish, is scientifically supported, and the occasional use of low dose melatonin is supported. That's another one that I will give my stamp of approval to. There is only one diet that is supported for brain health, and we are going to talk about that once we get to the recommendations. This next one I think is pretty surprising, and this has to do with the health of our mouth. So one of the ways in science that we get our best insights is by studying twins who were raised in 2 different environments. So you got twins that got the exact same DNA, identical twins. They are adopted by 2 different families, and now you do research with them. So you have the opportunity to consider, genes versus environment, nature versus nurture. So they looked at these twins raised in different environments, and what they found is that if before the age of 35, they had a loose tooth or a lost tooth, had to get it pulled out or it fell out, these folks had a 4-fold increased risk of dementia. Oh my goodness. Now you might think, well, they didn't take good care of their teeth, there was too much bacteria. That would be a very normal guess, but it turns out it's not that at all. What it really is inflammation. And this is a concept that's definitely hot in scientific circles right now. And we're talking here about systemic inflammation. Inflammation in and of itself is actually a very healthy, normal response of the immune system. But the way the immune system is designed to work over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution is that there is an invader, it goes into full force, the invader is taken care of, and the system can then relax, okay? We are meant to be scared by the tiger, once every month. Once we have all that adrenaline pumping and we take the tiger down, then we are meant to go back to baseline, and that is not happening in modern life. We are constantly stressed out. Eating processed foods is incredibly easy. It is easier. Let the truth be told. We're all exhausted. So this is a consequence of the modern lifestyle if you don't know better, right? So a lot of the stuff that we talk about in terms of stress management, diet, exercise, a lot of these are going to reduce inflammation. Next one is education and job complexity. So those of you who work with other people will really appreciate this. So there's a very clear relationship between education and dementia, but it's really between folks who have very little to no education. So people who never went to school, and this is done, more in other countries. In the United States, for the most part, we don't struggle with this, but where I practice in North Carolina, I've certainly seen plenty of patients who left school in 3rd grade, 5th grade to go work on their parents' farm. That is just what they had to do for their families to survive. So there's very clear research if someone is very much lacking in education, that they are at higher risk for dementia. The only time it goes in the opposite direction is with Parkinson's disease. We don't understand why, but there are more folks who have Parkinson's disease with PhDs or medical degrees than there are in any other subtype of dementia, and that remains a bit of a medical mystery. So this is getting into what we do for work now, those who reported having complex jobs that work with people had a 60% lower risk of dementia than those who were focused on data and numbers, even though they still had a nice 23% less risk. So why is this? Well, there's really two things. People are very complicated, and managing people is certainly one of the most complicated things. So we think it's related to the more you use your brain, the more you create these strong bonds between brain cells, which creates more and more stronger brain networks. Working with people requires so much decision making. Anytime you're having to think on the fly, on your feet, you're having to take in a lot of data to then make a decision. These things are related to cognitive reserve, putting those deposits into your brain bank. The next one is mental stimulation. This is really what we do with our hobbies in middle life, okay? So those of us who do things that require increasing mastery, something that you start off not so great, but over time you do it repetitively. There's something unique about it, and you do it in a way that makes you get better and better at it. Okay, so the 3 rules of thumb when we think about the most brain healthy activities are that you do things that are new, introducing novelty. Don't do the same old thing every night, every weekend, because the more the brain can go on autopilot, the more it will. So we need to introduce different things. Repetition, doing something over and over again, is the essence of learning. And the more you learn, the stronger the connections are between brain cells and brain networks. When you are increasing your expertise in an activity, again, you are just having better and more efficient communication between different parts of your brain, and it increases the resistance of those brain networks breaking down because of one of these diseases that causes dementia. So the goal here, though, is to find your sweet spot with your hobbies or interests. If it's too hard, you might do it once, but you're not going to be reinforced to do it again. But really what happens with most folks is they just stick with the same TV shows, same crossword puzzle, same easy Sudoku book. And now you know that's really not the best. You want to try to shake it up a little bit. One of our last risk factors in this age group is shift work or night work. So unfortunately, this is really tough. And the effects seem to come. There's a moderate elevated risk for folks who work overnight. It's really because working and being active at night and sleeping during the day gets us totally out of the normal circadian rhythm. On some levels, the brain is very simple. The brain, when there is sunlight out, is able to absorb the sun rays, and all sorts of messages happen to our stress system that tell us now is the time to work. Now is the time to be alert. Now is the time to be your most capable of handling an event. When the sun goes away, we have a complete different shift. That's when we go from excreting cortisol to excreting melatonin, and we are meant to be sleeping. That is the way the human biology is designed. And when we don't have sleep in the normal rhythm, that whole cycle gets thrown off too. And what we really worry about is because we now know that the function of sleep, the whole reason, why do we sleep? I mean, what a kooky thing to think 8 hours a night we go completely unconscious. It's a very vulnerable time. If you think too of, cavemen and women, how could you not be on guard for 8 hours a night? It must do something. And it's really only recently that we understand, and we're going to talk about this in our sleep lecture, but during deep sleep, the brain is doing a cleaning out process. There is byproducts that happen, from think of a fire, right? You're going to get smoke. So when brain cells are busy working all day, you're going to have some byproducts that need to be chopped up into little pieces, which your immune system does, and it gets it out of there. It literally physically moves junk, waste from your brain down into your gut so you can get rid of it. So when your sleep is off, this is concerning to us. And what we can tell from manipulating different animals like mice is that when sleep deprivation happens and folks are out of sync with the natural cycle, they build up more of that amyloid that is the hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. Next one is too much alcohol. Okay, so as we get older, we really can't handle the same amount that we maybe could in our 20s. Okay, and alcohol consumption at over 3 drinks a day for about 20 years is a risk factor for developing alcohol dementia and vascular dementia. So why this matters is because if you're someone who's maybe indulged a little bit too much, or you're worried about a loved one, it's amazing to me. It takes 20 years to have a brain effect. Okay, so 5 years, really, we don't see anything long-term. Even 10 years, even 15 years, there's something about that tipping point at 20 years that seems to do it. Okay. There is a lot of controversy about the positive effects of alcohol, but we certainly do know that people who drink 1 to 2 glasses of alcohol a day, it's pretty clear that they actually have healthier brains than people who don't drink any alcohol at all, which you might either be out there clapping or wondering how that could be true. But what we think is that, how after you have a glass of wine, your cheeks can get kind of red? Well, that's because your blood vessels are opening up. And so you already know from a few slides ago that the more open your blood vessels are, the more blood brings to the brain, the more oxygen, the more glucose. Our brains get more fuel when we drink a little, but we have to find that sweet spot, right? Okay, now we're going to move into older adulthood. This is this nice, handsome guy. He kind of looks like Captain Kirk, but I don't think that's who it is. Okay, unfortunately, the biggest risk factor for dementia is just age. And there's, what can we do about that? But for every 5 years we are over the age of 65, the risk for Alzheimer's and vascular dementia doubles. I am sorry to tell you that. And it's related to 4 things. Increased risk of things like diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, just wear and tear, changes to our DNA and the cell structure, weakening of the body and the brain's immune system. They are related but different. Once you get above about here in your carotid arteries, we actually have different parts of our immune system that only work on brain function. And over time, just like the body's immune system, it's just not as perky. It's just not as efficient. And the last one is, as we know, we excrete less hormone, estrogen and testosterone as we get older. This is kind of a burgeoning area in neuroscience. We don't know a lot about it now, but we certainly know that people go through changes in life because of hormones. Next one is taking too many medications. Any of us who are aging, right, which is everyone, once you get over the age of 40 or 50, boy, do you start getting more prescriptions, right? And you might even start taking more supplements and vitamins because the idea is, hey, I'm getting older, I might really need it now. So what we consider to be polypharmacy is if people take over 4 medications once they're past the age of 65. So you can think for yourself if that is you. And the reason this is concerning is because there are 3 things that happen with normal aging that affect the way we take in substances, the way we process them, and the way that we excrete them. And this is a loss of muscle mass and changes to our kidneys and changes to our liver. Those 3 things make it so drugs stick around a lot longer. So we have a lot higher sensitivity to all different types of substances. So prescription meds, vitamins, alcohol, food, anything, right? The reason we get concerned is because polypharmacy increases the risk of cognitive impairment. Now, I'm about to tell you something that might knock your socks off, but we have to have an agreement. I want to see some pinky promises out there. You cannot stop a medication because what I am about to say, okay? Our agreement is that you will become a more empowered patient. You will go to page 54 in your workbook as we talk about this next concept. And if it is relevant to you, you're going to bring it to your primary care doctor, right? You're not going to play pharmacist and say, Dr. Sullivan told me about this medicine and I don't like what it does. Okay, don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to me. There is a class of medications called anticholinergics, and I bet most of you have not heard about this, but this may be the most critical piece of information that I share with you tonight. Again, a class of medications, and they are prescribed for all different things, most commonly urinary incontinence. So if you go to your doc and you say, I can't sleep because I'm getting up 3, 4, 5, 10 times a night to pee, they might give you one of these medications, okay? Some antidepressants, sleep medication, allergy medication. So here's a couple of the biggest offenders: Benadryl, Dramamine, Dimetapp, oxybutynin, one of those urinary medications, Paxil, any PM drug, okay, Tylenol PM, Advil PM, or something called Unisom, right, the over-the-counter sleep medications. And what I want you to know is that the effects of these medications are cumulative, and they can either be mild, moderate, or severe. So what you are going to do when we're done talking tonight is you're going to go to your workbook, 54, 55. You're going to circle every medication that you take. And if it's on the list, it has a number, either a 1, a 2, or a 3. You're going to add up your number. The higher it is, the more concerned you're going to be because of this. So the risk for cognitive impairment is increased by 50% as you're an older adult if you take 3 of the mild anticholinergics for more than 3 months. But I want you to look at this next piece of data. Your risk for cognitive impairment is 100%, okay, not 50, not 70, not 99, but 100% in people who take 1 or more what we call severe anticholinergics for just 60 days. Okay, so I'm going to get out my workbook right now. So this means if you were to take Dramamine or Benadryl every day for 60 days, as some people do take it to sleep, it is 100% guaranteed that you will have a diagnosable cognitive impairment. Okay, that should concern you. It certainly concerns me. Now, over time, we get worried that after about 7 years, people who are taking high doses of these anticholinergics are 4 times more likely to get dementia and have less brain matter in their temporal lobes, right here in their memory areas, okay? So if you noticed, it's called anticholinergic, anticholine, right? Choline is a chemical that when it is in the brain, it supports learning and memory. If you know about any of the dementia medications like Aricept or Namenda, what it does is it puts more choline into your brain. What these medications are doing is they're sucking choline out of your brain. They make you dry, thirsty. They make your eyes dry. They make you not have to pee as much, right? But they also kind of make the brain dry, and the brain has a harder time working. The other class of medications I want you to know about are benzodiazepines. These are what we typically use like Klonopin, Valium, Xanax for sleeping or anxiety. Just 1 dose will impair someone's memory, attention, more likely to have car accidents, increased risk of falls. Okay, this is why we get concerned when older folks are prescribed these medications for sleep, because they're more likely to get up in the night to use the bathroom, more likely to have a fall, break their hip. Okay, it's still a little bit unclear if folks who use these medications over time are at an increased risk for dementia, but I think so. But the balance here is not black or white decision making. It's not, well, don't ever take those, or you know what, I can be free to take them. I simply want you to be informed and don't not question these things if they're in your regimen, okay? Now we're gonna transition over to, this is a risk factor of mood, of emotional well-being. So it's not being alone as we're older that has a negative effect on the brain. It's if we judge that time alone as being lonely. So what they did in one study was they followed the people who reported being the loneliest on a questionnaire over 12 years. And what they found is that they had about 20% faster rate of cognitive decline, of their memory abilities going down. Okay, very important thing to know. Next one is delirium. You may have known someone who has a delirium. This is when folks go in the hospital or after an operation, or commonly have a urinary tract infection, and all of a sudden, oh my God, the confusion, sleep-wake disturbance, sometimes visual hallucinations, delusions. It can be really scary for a family member. The more times folks go through these deliriums, they are at higher risk for developing dementia, almost as much as 8 times. Okay, that is very significant. Or if someone has dementia going into a delirium, instead of the decline that might look like this, we're looking at a big old drop, okay? And many people never come back to baseline. So the most critical thing there is to treat the underlying cause. So you may need time for the anesthesia to wear off. You may need to get someone back to their home to have familiar circumstances. Most commonly, though, request a urine analysis if something like that happens to a loved one, because very often it is a urinary tract infection. Next risk factor is untreated hearing loss. If you live long enough, you've got a very high chance of having hearing loss. And it turns out when it is severe enough to interfere with conversation, we're about a quarter more likely to have cognitive decline over 6 years. People who have hearing loss and it's not treated have less gray matter in the part of their brain that receives and processes sounds. So this is concerning because folks isolate when they can't hear. We all know the person who says, I don't want to go to the party, I can't hear. Well, if those auditory cells aren't getting enough stimulation, they are going to self-destruct. The brain is very efficient. If those cells don't have a job to do, they don't need to stick around. And the auditory cortex is about here, right above your ears. Well, guess what is the next door neighbor to the auditory cortex? The hippocampus, the memory centers of the brain, where Alzheimer's starts. And so the idea is that the brain kind of learns what they're calling this march of death into dementia when hearing loss is untreated. I think this is our last one here for risk factors, and then we're going to do our recommendations. So the concern is that being in bed, sleeping too little, less than 6 hours, or too much, more than 9 hours, are predictive of dementia if you follow people over about 17 years. Okay, so both of those are considered to be risk factors. So now, as promised, we're going to take all that learning, right? And now you're going to get your homework. These are your directions, your instructions. So this is a great time to stretch. That's good. Going to have some of my iced tea. In the South, you know, that's all we drink is tea. Okay, so once again, this is the, okay, Dr. Sullivan, you got me good and scared. You informed me, but now I have to know what to do. The message here, one of our most important messages, is you have to take control of your brain health, okay? Back in the day, you could have had a primary care doctor you saw for an hour at a time. And by the time you were done catching up about the family and you talked about your aches and pains or your concerns, then maybe you could say, you know, I'm a little worried. I can't quite remember like I used to. That's not happening now because these follow-up appointments are 7 minutes on average. We have a lot of cooks in the kitchen nowadays. You got a cardiologist, you got primary care, maybe you even have a neurologist, okay? The person who has to be the quarterback, the center of your medical team really has to be you. And one of the most important things for brain health that I want you to track are these prescription medications, what you are putting into your body, okay? There's a couple ways you can go about doing that. One is always use the same pharmacist. Pharmacists are undervalued for what they offer us. But every year when you go to your physical, you're going to make a list, and I think it's even in your workbook, actually. You're going to make a list of all prescription medications from every doctor. You're going to put vitamins in there. You're going to put supplements in there. Anything that you put into your body in the form of a capsule or, a tincture, you are going to put it in there. And you're going to talk about, how can I reduce my medication safely? It's probably not realistic to think you're going to go in there and, have 3 or 4 taken off. But you should be on the minimum amount of medication that you need to optimally control your health risk, okay? And if you're not the one advocating for that, the cardiologist can prescribe a blood pressure medication, then the primary care does. You get 2 different things. Now you've got low blood pressure, you're dizzy, you have a fall. Too many cooks in the kitchen. So please take control of that yourself. This recommendation falls under the proactive things we can do for cognitive reserve. Challenge your brain. There's some researchers looking at old age, and they've made it really simple to understand. As you get older, there's a very strong pull to be more passive, right? Sit more, watch more TV, right? Stay in your house. Harder to get, out and be active when you're older for some folks. Versus being active. Take an active interest in what's going on around you. Engage with information. Value things that are complex. When you do that, the reward will be a lower risk of dementia or slower cognitive decline if you do happen to develop dementia. So remember the 3 rules of thumb: novelty, newness, bringing flair in; repetitive, do things over and over again. And the point is to be challenged, to constantly be finding that your ceiling on your abilities goes up and up and up. Next one is move your body more. Any type of increased movement is good for your brain. Seriously, whether or not you get up once an hour from your workstation and just walk and get some water, that is better than maybe you did the day before. Okay. But remember, what did we learn from our research before? Twice a week, right? At least twice a week, 20 to 30 minutes to the point of breathlessness and sweating. That is your new instruction. There's 2 different things I want you to know that you might not have known about exercise that I hope motivates you. The first one is the direct benefits of exercise, right? Reduces blood sugar, reduces inflammation. But what about this? Stimulates the growth of new parts of brain cells called dendrites and even blood vessels in the brain. Holy cow. You are in a better mood. You sleep better. You're less stressed. You have less anxiety through these beautiful molecules called endorphins, okay? Feel good molecules. After 6 months of moderate exercise, you can literally grow a bigger prefrontal cortex and memory center in your brain. It releases growth hormones, which helps you develop better connections between your brain. And remember, it's not, oh boy, I have to exercise. I've got to get a trainer. I've got to, work out 6 times a week. No, at least twice a week, 20 to 30 minutes. For dementia, that's all it takes. Now let's just talk about alcohol. 1 to 2 a day max. Okay, 1 for women, 2 for men. In your workbook, we have a self-assessment. Sometimes we're doing things we don't even know. We've got habits. First thing is you're going to record how many drinks you actually drink over the course of a week. If you can't get it down to 1 or 2 a day, depending on your gender, talk to your doctor. It's important. Now, when I say 1 or 2 drinks a day, I am going to clarify that. Okay, so 1 beer, about a third of a pint of beer, 5 ounces of wine, or a shot to make a cocktail. And the reason we have to be so specific is that I know some of you out there were getting creative with the size of your glass. Okay, Dr. Sullivan, 1 a day. You got it. Wink, wink. Okay, no, don't be like Betty in this one regard, okay? Next one is to eat a Mediterranean diet. This is one of the most powerful things that you can do at any age is what do you put in your body? In 2013, there were some guidelines that were released for the prevention of Alzheimer's disease, and I want to share those with you. Might not be surprised to know, minimize your intake of saturated fats, and especially trans fats that come from things that sit on a grocery store shelf, any crackers, cookies, stuff like that. As much as you can, whole food, plant-based diet, and get your vitamins from food, okay? When you get a vitamin from food, it is in a context of nutrition. It is not isolated and the milligrams aren't, sky high. It's much more bioavailable for your body and your brain to actually absorb it. They recommend a multivitamin without metals, so no iron or no copper. And that's still based on, it's mostly been debunked, but every once in a while you get a new scientific paper that shows iron accumulations in the brain of Alzheimer's folks. So they want to be very careful about that. This relates to that very important influence of our social health. But what I want to encourage you is that you don't have to do it anyone else's way. You don't have to suddenly become a partier. You don't all of a sudden have to start hosting dinner parties with 10 people. Okay. What I want you to do is have a social life that is meaningful to where you don't feel lonely. That is the self-reflection question on social health. So the more socially engaged you are, right? Visiting family, looking after grandkids, joining a club, volunteering, going to church, getting together even on Zoom where you are part of a community. These are the things that are brain healthy. If you have hearing loss, please get an evaluation about once every 2 years. Once you are 60 years old is about right. And if you have the hearing aids, please wear them, okay? Our last recommendation is to stay out of the hospital. Now remember, if you need to go, you need to go, right? And time is brain. So we're not saying be overly cautious, but it's more about prevention. As we get older, one of the number one things that get us into the ER is falling, okay? Wear sensible shoes around the house, okay? Check your shoes. If they're slippy, donate them, throw them out. All those little cute little area rugs that you love to get from Crate and Barrel and Target, not good when you get older. It's too much of a fall risk. The other thing that gets folks in the hospital is over or undertaking medications. Now, it's much more often the case that it is overtaking them, right? You just have them in the bottles, you open it, you're distracted, you don't realize 2 hours later, gosh, did I take my medication? You go back, hey, might as well take another one, okay? Don't do that. Buy a 99-cent pill box from Walgreens or CVS, and you'll never wonder if you took it again or not. The final recommendation is if you are worried about any type of cognitive issue, okay, the earlier you get yourself to a good quality evaluation, the better. There are memory medications on the market today that will slow down the rate of decline in many different dementias, okay? So your best chance is to ask for a neuropsychological evaluation. That is the gold standard. So my goodness, have you guys been good listeners? I know that these lectures are dense. I know that they're kind of long, but I cannot hold back. I need you to know the important things and how to manage these risk factors. So now what we're going to do is some good old-fashioned question and answer. I've been seeing some questions pop up here, and I am so excited to figure out what you guys thought about this experience tonight and how I can most help you. Okay, so I'm just going to say the question so I don't, expose who asked the question. So one of my questions is, should one get screened for dementia if they are not at risk of dementia but frequently get confused or foggy-minded? Yes, whoever asked this question, great question. Cognitive symptoms, which happened before, dementia is just a worsening of cognitive symptoms. This includes trouble with processing speed, taking in information, getting information, attention, being oriented, brain fog is a thing, right? You hear of it all the time. So a good reason to get screened or evaluated is any cognitive symptom at all, because especially if you're younger, it's oftentimes something treatable. It can be a medication issue. It can be chronic pain. It can be sleep problems. That is so common. It can be depression. It can be anxiety. So important. Okay. So I go to your primary care and say, hey, do you work with a neuropsychologist? You can also email us here and ask us for a personal recommendation. We're more than happy to look up your zip code and find the closest board certified neuropsychologist to you. That would be our pleasure to help you with that. Okay, what are the first steps of care / screening for someone who has dementia? So the most sensitive, powerful way we have to diagnose dementia is neuropsychological evaluation. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a neuropsychologist. That's why I picked neuropsychology, because it's more powerful than an MRI. And I'm going to give you a perfect real world example that happened to one of my patients this week. So an MRI is showing you a picture of the brain, right? So you can either have a CT scan that uses, radiation, radio waves, or you can have an MRI, which is a much more detailed way using magnets of painting a picture of the brain. That is what we call the structure of the brain, okay? What I do as a neuropsychologist is I'm evaluating the function of the brain, okay, what the brain does. How about this? How does the person feel, right? We bring the humanity into the brain health equation. Sometimes structure and function don't match up. Oftentimes people have something in their brain, but remember that 1 in 4, right? Not everyone has a problem from it. Alternatively, I've seen people with beautiful MRIs, and I know that they have Alzheimer's because of the pattern of the cognitive testing that I've done. Okay. So just this week, I have had a patient who I thought had a subtype of dementia called frontotemporal dementia. And she went, and on her testing, she had a lot of trouble with what we call executive functioning, trouble with multitasking, being able to learn new information, being able to recall it quickly. And I know that was the pattern of what she had. And she went and got a brain scan, and they convinced her that there was nothing wrong. And one of the symptoms of Alzheimer's, the more it progresses, is the person loses insight or awareness into the fact that there's any change. And that can be so hard when you're trying to bring it up and trying to help someone, and they really don't think there's a memory problem. So now I've got these experts, quotes, telling her brain is normal, but it's not acting normal, right? So the most important thing is neuropsych testing, because we are able to compare how you would do on the test to other folks 55 with a bachelor's degree, right? So you need a proper evaluation. The MRI can be helpful for, the best thing it does is rule something out. It tells me someone doesn't have a brain tumor, there's been no stroke, there's no shrinking all over or in one part, they haven't had a skull fracture, right? Many dementias are not really visible on the neuroimaging that a common person would get. So neuropsychology evaluation is much better. Okay, look at all these questions. I absolutely love it. Okay, somebody asked me if there's any studies that focus around musicians, and I really appreciate that question because I am married to a musician. Music is one of the best. I mean, any creative pursuit, but think about what I told you about your hobbies, right? You want novelty, you want repetition, and you want to get better. Music, right, is maybe the best one of those things, right? So we could have talked about painting, crochet, crossword puzzles, fingernail polish, right? Whatever it is, as long as you apply those principles of novelty, repetition, and over time getting better and better, you're going to get the brain effects. Music is particularly good because it combines two things. Now, this is like really cutting edge. This is what neuroscientists are talking about at their conferences right now, and it's called dual task training. And what it is when you do something physical and you do something cognitive. So about 5 years ago, you might recall in the media, there was a lot of news stories about the power of ballroom dancing, okay? And what they figured out by studying that is because you were multitasking, your body was remembering to move certain ways, right? And your brain was telling you the steps. And over time, you do it more and more, you introduce new steps, and over time you get better, okay? There seems to be extra power when we do things across the body as well, right? So left hand doing one thing, right hand doing the other thing, okay? So, there's been some kind, I've seen funny cartoons, protect your brain by brushing your teeth with the left hand. That it's kind of the idea, but really it would take repetition in order to be able to have that positive effect. So I really appreciate that question. Okay. Okay, since blood flow is so important to the brain, do you recommend us to take a massage class? Oh my God, I love massage. It's one of the best self-care things you can do. I think there's many benefits of massage, but probably I'm going to say that the most powerful is the stress reduction and the sitting still and calming the central nervous system. So we're not in that constant state of hypervigilance that so many of us get in, either through working, multitasking, kids, work, all that kind of stuff. The brain, the soul really needs extended time to just be calm with no curveballs. The thing, I know what you're trying to connect it to, but I would say a lot of the research done on the benefits of movement is when it's self-initiated. So certainly if somebody though, has had a stroke or is in a hospital bed, passive movement of massage, and there's tons of other benefits, but in terms of this type of benefit, you would need to be the one to initiate the action. So I hope that was helpful for you. Okay, let me see here. All right. Well, I would love to know what you guys thought about tonight. Do you think that this is information that you will use? Do you think that it was, really worthy of an hour and a half of your time? I'm always looking to make improvements. And so we really appreciate your feedback. Someone asked a great question about, has meditation been proven to benefit brain health and warding off dementia? It definitely has. It has not been studied enough. When I'm designing this program, which now goes back about 4 years, we've had probably about 12 to 15,000 people go through this program. We've done it in person in North Carolina, in person in South Carolina right now, and we're really just moving into doing it in wellness programs for corporations. And again, that's why I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to the wonderful Lourdes, because she is the person who brought us here today, knowing that you would all appreciate this information. But it was hard to, we can't be here for 10 hours, right? It was hard for me to prioritize what are the most important things. That's really why the program is multi-lectured, because it's just too much to get into one. So I think so much that, so much about wellness. The thing that's really true though, is you really shouldn't be spending a ton of money on brain health, right? So the things that, you could spend money on, good pair of walking shoes, organic food, meditation, mindfulness, visualization, a lot of that stuff is free on YouTube. That's what I always recommend to my patients. Music, prayer, but the common denominator there is that calming of the nervous system and getting those stress hormones down over a consistent amount of time. Okay, so anything that you can do that is nice and calming is really, really good for you guys. Oh, I'm someone who kind of thrives on positive reinforcement. I'm not going to lie. And so when you are telling me that you enjoy this program, that just means so much. I can't wait to be back with you next time. So check this out. For the next 2 months, we're going to get to spend more time together. November 18th is evidence-based methods for improving memory. And the reason this is important is we're all worried about memory, and a lot of those too good to be true products promise you improved memory. So what I'm going to tell you is all about the real deal, right? What are the strategies? I'm going to teach you internal strategies, what you can do in your own mind, and external strategies. What are the things that you can do that will, outside yourself, organizational strategies, technology, what are some of those things? Then on December 2nd, this is a great, great lecture, how sleep changes with age. By the time we're done with that lecture, you're going to understand sleep. You're going to know how powerful and important it is. And most important, you're going to know exactly what to do to improve it on your own. And if you can't, what are the step-by-steps that is going to take you to the next level? Because we all need to be having long, continuous time in every single sleep cycle including especially deep sleep and REM sleep. Once you understand what happens to your brain and your well-being in deep sleep, oh my goodness, it is very, very powerful. So with that, my lovelies, I am going to bid you a wonderful night. I so appreciate our special time together, and I can't wait to see you again in November and December. Thank you all so much, and I hope you have a wonderful, safe week, month until I see you again. Okay, take care. Bye.